The palace of Queen Lura stood like a shadow of its former glory. Once, the tall towers shone with bright silver and the great halls echoed with music. Now the walls were cracked, the windows broken, and silence hung heavy in every corridor. Dust covered the marble floor, and weeds grew through the once proud gardens. The kingdom had not fallen, but it had become weak after years of war. Queen Lura sat alone in her throne room. The room was large, with pillars carved in ancient style, yet the air inside felt cold. Once this place welcomed visitors from distant stars, but now only empty chairs surrounded her. The war against rival houses had left her people divided, and even her loyal followers no longer looked at her the same way. Her face bore deep scars, reminders of the last great battle. She had fought bravely, leading her soldiers from the front. When victory slipped away, she stood against her enemies until her body gave out. Her enemies could not kill her, but they left wounds that never healed. To her people, scars meant weakness. To her rivals, scars meant shame. The once admired queen was now whispered about in corners. Some called her the broken one. Others said she was no longer beautiful, and without beauty she could not inspire her people. She wore a thin veil across her face to hide what she believed no one should see. When she looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the throne room, she turned away in pain. The mirror did not show a queen, it showed a shadow of the woman she used to be. Servants still brought her food and guards still stood watch, but even they did not meet her eyes. She saw it clearly. Respect had turned into pity, and pity was worse than hatred. Every day she wondered why she still sat on the throne at all. Perhaps her people only kept her there because no one else wanted to sit in a cursed seat. Her mind often returned to the night of fire when her palace walls burned. She remembered the roar of weapons, the cries of her soldiers, the crack of falling towers. She remembered the pain in her body when the enemy struck her down. But more than the pain, she remembered the silence that followed. That silence never left her. It lived inside her heart, reminding her that she was no longer whole. As she sat in her throne room, her thoughts heavy, the great doors opened with a creak. A figure walked slowly into the hall. The guard stepped forward but did not stop him, for he carried no weapon. His clothes were simple and travel-worn, his boots coated in dust. His skin was pale compared to her people, his form smaller, less imposing. He was a human. Few humans ever came to this world. They were rare in the empire, often looked down upon by greater species. Humans had no vast fleets, no ancient power, no rich kingdoms. They were known only as wanderers, builders, or traders. Many thought of them as weak, yet stubborn. The man stopped at the center of the hall and bowed politely. His eyes did not look away from her, though the veil still covered her face. "Who are you?" Lura asked, her voice soft yet cold. She expected flattery or fear, but his tone was calm when he answered. "My name is Ryan," he said. "I am a traveler. I came with tools, not weapons. I heard the palace needed repair, so I came to offer my hands." His words confused her. No one came here to help. Strangers came only to take or to mock. She narrowed her eyes, studying him. "You think a human can fix what is broken here?" she asked. Ryan looked around at the cracked pillars and broken lamps. His gaze lingered on the walls where light no longer glowed. "I can try," he said simply. "Broken things are not useless. They only wait for someone who cares enough to mend them." Lura almost laughed, though her heart was too heavy for it. "You speak as if it is easy. Do you not see the ruin around you? Do you not see me? The man looked at her then, not at her scars, not at her veil, but at her eyes. His gaze did not carry pity. It carried warmth. "I see a queen who still sits on her throne," he said. "If you were truly broken, you would not be here at all. You are still here. That means you are not finished." His words struck her deeper than she expected. For years no one had spoken to her in such a way. Her people called her weak. Her rivals called her ugly. Yet this human, a stranger with nothing to gain, looked at her as if she still mattered. Silence stretched between them. The queen felt the weight of her doubts pressing against the light of his words. She wanted to believe him, but her scars burned as if reminding her of the truth. Finally she said, "Why do you not turn your eyes away? Others cannot bear to look at me." Ryan's lips curved into a small smile. "Because I see beauty where others do not. I see strength in scars. I see hope in survival. You say you are ugly, but I say you are proof that even after fire, a flame can rise again." Her heart stirred at his words, though she did not show it. She turned her face slightly, as if to hide behind the veil once more. Yet in that moment, she wondered if perhaps she had been hiding not from others, but from herself. The hall remained quiet except for the faint sound of wind through the broken windows. Lura looked at this human traveler, simple and unafraid, and felt something she had not felt in years. She felt the first spark of curiosity, the faintest touch of hope. The broken throne still stood. The broken queen still breathed. And perhaps, with this stranger's strange words, something within her was beginning to heal. The great hall stayed quiet after Ryan spoke, his words still echoing in Queen Lura's heart. She studied him closely, searching for some sign of hidden purpose. Strangers rarely came without reason. He did not wear armor, nor did he carry the mark of spies or thieves. His hands bore calluses from work, not from battle. His eyes held calm, not fear. The queen shifted on her throne. "You claim you came to repair. Yet why come here of all places? Do you not know this palace is cursed in the eyes of many?" Ryan's voice carried no tremble. "I have traveled many worlds. Everywhere I go, I see things abandoned. Ships left to rust, gardens left to wither, palaces left to crumble. People call them useless, but I do not believe in useless things. If something still stands, it can stand again. I came here because I heard your palace still lives, though wounded. I thought perhaps I could give back some light." The queen almost turned away, but her curiosity held her still. For years no one had spoken with such plain honesty. Her own advisors gave only careful words, full of fear and distance. This human spoke like he saw no throne at all, only a person who needed help. She waved her hand, signaling to the guards. "Take him to the lower halls. If he wishes to repair, let him see what has been left behind. But keep watch. If his words are lies, he will not remain here long." The guards bowed and motioned for Ryan to follow. He gave the queen one last small smile, then walked with them down the cracked steps and into the shadowed corridors of the palace. Lura leaned back in her throne, her thoughts restless. Why had she allowed him to stay? A human, one of the least regarded among the stars, offering help to a queen whose own people no longer cared. It made no sense. Yet something in his voice carried a weight she could not ignore. The lower halls of the palace smelled of dust and metal. Old lamps no longer burned. Fallen beams blocked passageways. The once mighty machines that powered the palace lay silent. Ryan walked slowly, his eyes tracing every detail. He touched the stone walls, felt the roughness of the cracks, and studied the dead wires. His gaze was not that of a visitor but of a worker imagining what could be fixed. The guards followed close, hands on their weapons. They expected him to turn away in fear at the sight of ruin. Instead, he knelt beside a broken power unit, running his fingers along the joints as if greeting an old friend. "This can be mended," he murmured. One guard frowned. "These machines have not worked in years. Even our best engineers gave up." Ryan looked at the guard calmly. "They gave up because they thought the palace itself was dying. But machines do not die. They only wait. Give me tools and I will show you." The guards exchanged uncertain looks. No one trusted him fully, yet no harm came from letting him try. They allowed him to work, though one kept his hand near his blade. Ryan pulled a small kit from his pack. His tools were simple, made by human hands. No shining alien devices, no grand instruments, only plain wrenches, wires, and a small lamp. He bent over the power unit, opening panels with care. Dust fell like powder, and the stale air grew thick, but he did not pause. The guards watched as sparks leapt under his touch. He twisted wires together, polished rust from metal, and tightened bolts. His movements were steady, filled with patience. Hours passed, and at last a low hum rose from the unit. A weak light blinked to life. The guards stepped back in surprise. The sound of the machine was faint, but it was real. Something thought dead had begun to breathe again. Ryan wiped sweat from his brow and smiled. "See? Not useless. Only forgotten." When the queen learned what he had done, she ordered him brought back to her chamber. She expected to see pride on his face, perhaps boasting of his skill. Instead she saw only quiet satisfaction. "You truly made the old machine breathe again," she said. "Yes," Ryan replied. "And there are many more waiting. The palace is like your people. They think it is broken, but it only needs care." Lura's voice grew heavy. "You speak of my people as if you know them. They see my scars and whisper that I am no longer fit to rule. They call me broken as well. Do you think I too can be repaired?" Ryan's eyes did not waver. "You are not a machine, but you are not broken. You survived when others would have fallen. You remain on your throne when others fled. If that is not strength, then what is?" For a long time the queen said nothing. His words felt strange in her ears, for no one had spoken to her with such directness. She wanted to believe, yet fear held her heart. "You speak boldly for one so small," she said at last. Ryan smiled faintly. Sometimes the small can see what the great overlook. In the days that followed, Ryan walked the ruined palace. He fixed doors that no longer opened, restored fountains that had run dry, and lit lamps in forgotten corridors. Wherever he worked, light returned. Servants who once moved in silence now paused to watch him. Some whispered among themselves, wondering why a human cared more for their home than they did. Queen Lura often watched from afar. She told herself it did not matter, that his repairs would change nothing. Yet each time another hall lit up, each time another fountain sang, she felt a small stirring in her chest. One evening she found him in the garden. Once it had been a place of color, filled with flowers from many worlds. Now weeds choked the paths and dead trees stood like bones. Ryan knelt in the soil, clearing space for new seeds he had brought from his travels. The queen's voice was soft when she spoke. "Why do you waste your time on a garden that may never bloom again?" Ryan looked up at her. His hands were dirty, but his eyes were bright. Because life returns when given a chance. Soil does not forget. Water does not forget. If we plant today, beauty may rise tomorrow. She looked at the patch of earth and then at him. For the first time in years, the queen did not feel the urge to hide her scars. She only stood in silence, listening to the humans speak of hope as if it were the simplest thing in the world. That night, as she sat once more in her throne, she whispered to herself, "Why call me beautiful, human, when even my own people call me ugly?" She remembered his calm smile, the way he spoke without fear. And though she tried to deny it, a quiet voice inside her answered. Perhaps the human saw something she could not yet see. The palace halls no longer felt as silent as before. Where shadows once lay heavy, faint light now glowed from restored lamps. The sound of water trickled again through a small fountain Ryan had repaired in the central courtyard. Even the servants, who once walked quickly and quietly, now moved with less fear. A change was stirring, small yet noticeable, and its beginning could be traced to one human traveler who worked without rest. Queen Lura watched these changes from her throne. She told herself it was only the palace, only broken walls and old machines that mattered little. Yet in her heart, she knew the sight of light returning brought warmth she had long forgotten. Still, doubts weighed on her mind heavier than any stone. One evening, when the last rays of the twin suns slid across the floor of the great hall, she summoned Ryan before her. He entered quietly, wiping dust from his hands, his simple clothes marked with oil from a day of repairs. He bowed slightly but not as deeply as her own kind. His manner was always respectful yet never fearful. "You have worked hard," she said, her voice echoing across the chamber. "The halls shine again. Even the gardens stir with life. Yet I must ask why. Why does a human wanderer spend his strength on a place that others abandoned?" Ryan lifted his eyes to her. "Because I do not see it as abandoned. I see it as waiting. Waiting for someone to care enough to bring it back. Just as I do not see you as fallen, my queen, but as waiting for the moment to rise again." His words struck her, and she felt her chest tighten. She leaned forward slightly, her veil casting a shadow over her scarred face. "You speak as if you know me," she said. "But do you not hear what my people say? They whisper that I am no longer fit to rule. They say beauty was my crown, and without it I am nothing. They see only scars. Do you call them blind, or do you call yourself a fool?" Ryan did not flinch. "I call them afraid. Afraid to look beyond the surface. Afraid to admit that strength is greater than beauty. They hide behind shallow words because they cannot carry the weight of truth. And the truth is that you are still here. You breathe, you rule, you endure. That is worth more than any smooth face." Lura's hand tightened on the arm of her throne. Her voice rose, heavy with the bitterness she carried. "You speak easily because you are not the one who bears these scars. You do not feel the eyes of your own people turning away. You do not know the silence of a throne where no song is sung and no cheer is heard. You do not know what it is to be called ugly when once you were admired." Her words echoed through the hall, and for a long moment silence returned. She expected him to bow, to lower his gaze, perhaps even to apologize. Instead he stepped closer, his face calm but filled with quiet strength. "You are right," Ryan said. "I do not carry your scars. But I carry my own. They are not carved into my skin, but they live in my past. My people too are called weak. Many see humans as small and unworthy. Yet still we walk among stars. Still we build, still we dream. If we listened only to the voices of others, we would have vanished long ago. I cannot erase what you have suffered, my queen, but I can tell you this. Scars do not end a life. They mark a life that has endured. The queen's breath caught, and she turned her face away. For years she had hidden her pain behind the veil, showing nothing but coldness to those around her. Yet this human, with no crown and no army, spoke as if he saw into her heart. She whispered, almost to herself, "How can you call me beautiful when the stars themselves laugh at me?" Ryan's reply came without hesitation. Because beauty is not what the stars decide. Beauty is not in smooth skin or perfect form. It is in courage that does not die. It is in a queen who still sits on her throne when the world has turned its back. That is beauty, and no scar can take it away. Her eyes widened slightly behind the veil. His words wrapped around her doubts, not erasing them, but softening their sharpest edges. She had heard flattery before, but this was not flattery. His voice carried no fear of her, no hunger for reward. It was steady, honest, and unshaken. "You smile as you speak these things," she said, her tone lower now. "Do you mock me?" Ryan shook his head. "I smile because I see what others miss. I smile because I believe in what can rise again. That is my way. Where others see ruins, I see hope. Where others see scars, I see strength. And when I look at you, I see a queen who is still more than what she believes." The queen leaned back against her throne, her heart caught between anger and something softer she could not name. She wanted to deny him, to cast him out, to silence his voice. Yet part of her longed to hear more. For the first time in many years, she asked not as a queen, but as a woman. "If what you say is true, human, then tell me this. When you look at me, scarred and veiled, what do you truly see?" Ryan held her gaze without fear. His answer was simple, yet it carried the weight of truth. "I see a queen who has not fallen. I see a leader who still has the power to rise. I see beauty that does not fade with time or battle, because it is carved into strength itself." Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned her head away, unable to let him see the storm in her heart. For the first time since the war, her doubts did not feel like chains. They felt like shadows retreating before a small, steady light. That night, alone in her chamber, Laura removed her veil. She stood before the mirror and faced her scars. For years she had turned away, but now she looked. The marks of battle were clear, yet as she remembered Ryan's words, her reflection no longer seemed only broken. She touched the scars gently, and though pain remained, she whispered to herself, "Perhaps strength can be beautiful too." The palace was still cracked, her people still doubtful, her rivals still hungry for her fall. Yet for the first time, a voice inside her said she was not finished. Perhaps the human was right. Perhaps she still carried the power to rise. The palace began to change in ways Queen Laura had not expected. Light returned to long-forgotten halls, and the faint hum of repaired machines filled the air again. Where dust had once gathered thick and heavy, footsteps now echoed with purpose. Servants who once walked with lowered heads began to speak softly to one another. Even the guards, once grim and silent, carried themselves with a little more pride. At the center of these changes was the human traveler, Ryan. His hands were always busy, his voice calm, and his smile steady. He carried no crown, no banner, and no army, yet the air around him seemed to push away despair. He did not speak of greatness or glory, only of mending and hope. And somehow, Those simple words carried more weight than any speeches the queen's advisors had given in years. Queen Lura often watched him from a distance. She told herself it was only curiosity, that she simply wished to know what this strange human was doing within her walls. But as days turned into weeks, she found herself waiting to see where he would go next, what broken piece of the palace he would touch and bring back to life. One afternoon, she walked through the grand courtyard. The fountains there had been silent for years, dry stone basins filled with dust. Yet now water flowed again, spilling from carved mouths of stone beasts and falling into clear pools below. Servants gathered nearby, whispering in awe. The queen stopped, her gaze drawn to the sight of Ryan standing beside the fountain, his hands wet as he tested the flow. "You have done what even my engineers could not," she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. Ryan turned, water dripping from his fingers, and smiled. It was not difficult. The heart of the fountain was still alive. It only needed someone to clear the paths and give it breath again. "The palace is like that, my queen. It is not dead. It only waits." His words stirred something in her chest. She stepped closer, her veil stirring in the light wind. "You speak as if the palace has a soul." "Perhaps it does," Ryan said. "Perhaps every place carries the spirit of those who built it, of those who cared for it. And when that care is given again, the spirit wakes." The queen studied him. His hands were rough, his clothes plain, yet his eyes glowed with quiet certainty. He spoke not as a scholar or priest, but as someone who simply believed what he saw. "You treat this place as more than stone and metal," she said. "Why?" Ryan wiped his hands and looked at the flowing water. "Because places are like people. They break when forgotten, but they heal when cared for. The palace is your reflection, my queen. If it can rise again, so can you." Her breath caught at his words. She wanted to argue, to remind him that she bore scars that no water could wash away. Yet his calm smile disarmed her, and she could not speak. In the days that followed, Ryan turned his attention to the gardens. Once they had been a place of wonder, filled with flowers from distant worlds, their colors shining brighter than the stars. After the war, neglect and sorrow had left them barren. Dead branches twisted upward, weeds covered the paths, and the scent of rot replaced the fragrance of blossoms. Ryan knelt in the soil with patience. He cleared weeds with his hands, carried water from the fountains he had repaired, and planted small seeds he had carried from faraway places. His work was not quick, but it was steady. The queen came to watch him one evening as the twin suns lowered in the sky. He was on his knees, dirt smudging his clothes, his hands buried in the earth. Servants nearby whispered that it was beneath a human traveler to do such tasks, yet he worked as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You lower yourself to soil and weeds," she said as she approached. "Does this not shame you?" Ryan looked up, his face streaked with sweat, his eyes calm. "There is no shame in giving life a chance to return. Soil does not care for pride. Seeds do not care for crowns. They grow only when touched with care." His answer left her quiet. She moved closer, the veil brushing her face. "You are unlike any who have come before. Most seek power or favor. You seek only to mend what others cast aside." "Why?" Ryan pressed a seed gently into the earth before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be cast aside. My people are often overlooked. Yet we continue. We find strength in simple things, in working with our hands, in refusing to give up. Perhaps that is why I see worth in what others call worthless. Because I know the truth. Nothing is worthless if it still has breath left in it. The queen's throat tightened. For years she had believed her scars had stolen her worth, that her throne was a cage holding only shame. Yet this man spoke as if her life, like the soil, could bloom again if only given care. Later that night, she walked the quiet halls alone. Lamps glowed where once there had been darkness. The sound of water from distant fountains reached her ears. She paused by a tall window, looking out at the stars. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. The veil still covered her scars, yet she remembered Ryan's words, his steady smile, his hands working in the soil as if it were the most honorable task in the universe. For the first time in years, she lifted the veil and allowed the cool night air to touch her face. The scars were still there, carved deep by battles long past. Yet as she traced them with her fingers, she whispered, "If a garden can grow again, perhaps so can I." The next morning she returned to the gardens. Ryan was already there, watering the soil where new green shoots began to stir. She stood behind him for a moment before speaking. "Human," she said softly, "when you look at this garden, what do you see?" He glanced at the tender plants, then at her. "I see life returning. I see beauty not yet full but on its way. I see hope." She held his gaze. Her voice trembled slightly as she asked, "And when you look at me, what do you see?" Ryan did not hesitate. "I see the same." For a long moment she said nothing. The weight of his answer filled her heart, pushing against the walls she had built around it. She turned her face away, but her steps were lighter than they had been in years. The human touch was not in grand gestures or mighty deeds. It was in patience, in care, in the belief that what was broken could be whole again. And though the queen's doubts still lingered, she felt a new truth rising within her. Perhaps strength was not only in fighting wars. Perhaps it was also in learning to live again. The palace was breathing again. Lights glowed in the halls, fountains sang in the courtyards, and green shoots rose slowly from the soil in the gardens. For the first time in many years, Queen Lura felt a faint spark of pride in her home. Though her scars remained, she no longer hid every moment behind her veil. She sometimes walked the repaired halls with her head held higher, and the servants looked at her with less pity than before. Yet peace is never safe for long. Beyond the palace walls, rival houses watched with sharp eyes. For years they had believed Lura broken, her throne weak, her people divided. They had waited for the palace to crumble so they might claim it for themselves. Now whispers spread across the stars that the queen's halls were alive again, that light and water had returned. To her rivals, this was not a sign of hope but a threat to their power. One morning, as the suns rose pale above the hills, a scout rushed into the throne room. His armor was scratched, his face pale. He bowed quickly before the queen. "My queen," he said breathlessly, "our watchers have seen movement in the northern skies. Ships of the rival houses gather. They fly not in trade but in formation. They come here." The hall grew still. Servants stopped in their tracks, guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Queen Lura's heart sank, though her face remained calm. She had feared this day would come. Her enemies would not let her rise again so easily. She raised her voice, steady as iron. "Send word to our outer posts. Prepare the gates. Double the watch. We will not be caught unready." The scout bowed and rushed away. Ryan, who had been repairing a lamp in the hall, watched silently. When the queen's eyes turned to him, he stepped forward. "They mean to strike you while you are still healing," he said. "They fear what you may become if given more time." Lura's voice dropped low. They fear strength, yet they see only weakness. My guards are few, my fleet broken. My people's faith is thin. How can I hold against them? Ryan shook his head. By not giving up. That is how humans endure. We fight not with what we wish we had but with what we do have. You have walls, you have soldiers, you have machines that can breathe again if repaired. That is enough for a stand. The Queen studied him. His words carried no doubt, only quiet certainty. She wanted to believe, but fear pressed hard against her heart. She had led her people into war once before and lost much. Could she risk it again? Later that day, she walked the palace grounds. Ryan followed at her side, carrying his tools. She looked at the broken defense towers that lined the walls. Their weapons had been silent for years, rusted and forgotten. She pointed to them. These will not fire. Even our best engineers failed to bring them back. Ryan stepped closer, laying his hand on the cold metal. Then let me try. Machines do not forget their purpose. They only wait for someone to care enough to remind them. The Queen almost smiled at his familiar words. You think care alone will hold back fleets? No, Ryan said, turning to her with steady eyes. But care is the beginning. With care comes repair. With repair comes strength. And with strength comes hope. Let us try. Together with a small group of guards and servants, Ryan climbed the old towers. He worked with his hands while others fetched parts. Sparks flew as he cleaned rust, replaced wires, and tested circuits. Where others had failed with grand tools, he succeeded with patience. One by one, the towers hummed with life. The first time a cannon lifted its head and glowed with energy, the guards cheered. The sound spread across the palace like fire, lifting spirits that had long been crushed. For the first time since the war, the Queen's people saw their walls ready again. From her balcony, Lura watched the towers awaken. Her scars still marked her face, but her eyes shone with new fire. She turned to Ryan, who stood below, his clothes blackened with soot yet his smile unshaken. You give back what I thought lost forever, she said softly. Ryan looked up at her. I only remind you of what was always yours. You are not finished, my queen. Neither is your palace. That night, the stars above burned brighter, but the queen could not sleep. She stood in her chamber, looking out over her walls. In the distance, faint lights blinked in the sky, the enemy ships drawing closer. Doubts whispered in her mind. What if her people fell again? What if the palace burned once more? What if Ryan's hope was only a dream? She closed her eyes, and his words returned to her, we fight not with what we wish we had but with what we do have. The next morning, she gathered her council and her guards. She stood tall before them, veil lifted so all could see her scars. For years she had hidden them, but now she let them shine in the light of the suns. My people, she said, her voice carrying through the hall, our enemies come to strike us down. They believe us weak. They believe me broken. But look around you. Our halls shine again. Our towers breathe again. We are not finished. We will not bow. We will stand, and we will show them that scars are not weakness but proof of survival. The hall trembled with the sound of her voice. For the first time in many years, her people shouted in answer. The guards raised their weapons. The servants lifted their heads. Even the council, long filled with doubt, bowed with pride. Ryan watched quietly from the side. His smile was small, but his eyes glowed with pride. The queen had found her voice again, and it was stronger than ever. At the edge of the skies, the enemy fleet gathered, their ships dark against the stars. Soon they would descend, believing they would find only ruins and despair. Instead, they would find a palace alive, towers armed, and a queen whose spirit no longer bowed to shame. The rising threat was real, but so was the rising strength within the palace walls. And at the heart of it stood one human whose touch had reminded a broken queen that even scars could lead to victory. The morning air was crisp and quiet, but the stillness was only a mask for the storm approaching the palace. From the high walls, Queen Lura could see the distant lights of the enemy fleet. They moved steadily, dark and vast against the pale sky. The moment she had feared had arrived, yet she did not tremble. She had prepared her palace, repaired her towers, and, most importantly, regained her courage. Ryan stood beside her, his hands resting lightly on the rail. He had spent the previous nights repairing the last of the defense mechanisms, aligning weapons that had been silent for decades. His presence was calm and unwavering, as if the weight of the enemy fleet did not frighten him. The queen looked at him, remembering the first day he had entered her halls. She had doubted him, yet he had shown her what patience, care, and determination could do. "Are you ready, my queen?" Ryan asked softly. Lura's eyes swept across the walls, the towers, and the gardens. She saw her people moving through the halls, their faces filled with resolve. She nodded. "We are ready. Let them come." The enemy fleet reached the skies above the palace. Their ships were massive, armed with weapons designed to crush any defense. They had expected an easy victory, a palace unprepared and a queen defeated. Instead, they found the walls alive with energy, towers glowing with readiness, and human ingenuity woven into every mechanism. The first wave of attack struck quickly. The enemy fired energy beams at the outer walls, and sparks flew where the projectiles met the defenses. But the towers, repaired by Ryan's careful hands, activated their weapons and returned fire. Small, precise blasts disabled several incoming ships, sending them tumbling into the void. The queen stood at her balcony, watching the battle unfold. She felt fear, yet it did not control her. Her mind focused on her people, the walls she had restored, and the human who had reminded her that strength was more than outward appearance. Ryan moved among the towers, adjusting angles, repairing mechanisms under pressure. He did not wear armor, yet he climbed the high platforms with ease, his hands steady even as energy blasts struck near him. He shouted instructions to the guards, guiding them to fire in patterns that maximized their strength. Where others might have panicked, he remained calm, a steady hand in the chaos. One tower took heavy damage, its weapon offline and sparks flying from broken circuits. Without hesitation, Ryan leapt onto the platform, clutching his tools. He worked quickly, replacing wires and reconnecting circuits while enemy fire streaked past him. The guards watched in awe as the cannon hummed back to life, its energy beam ready to fire once more. "See," he said to one guard, "nothing is beyond repair if you do not give up." The enemy fleet sent their ground forces next. Ships lowered, and soldiers prepared to land, believing the palace would be unprotected. Yet the gates were strong, and the soldiers found themselves facing traps, automated defenses, and walls ready to resist. Every step forward was met with careful resistance, a puzzle designed by one human and maintained by a queen learning to trust her own strength again. In the courtyard, Lura led the guards, her voice ringing out clearly. She did not hide her scars, nor did she wear her veil. Her eyes met those of the enemy soldiers, and they faltered. They expected weakness, and they found a queen unafraid, standing with her people, her hand steady on the command of her troops. Ryan joined her in the courtyard briefly, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Your people follow you because you lead," he said. "Not because you are perfect, but because you are unbroken in spirit." Lura nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. She turned to her soldiers. "Remember this," she shouted. "Strength is not measured by the absence of scars, but by the courage to fight despite them." The battle raged for hours. Energy beams streaked across the sky, weapons roared from every tower, and the ground shook under the impact of enemy forces. Yet the palace endured. Soldiers found hope in the repaired mechanisms and the leadership of a queen who refused to yield. Servants and guards worked together, moving supplies, repairing minor damages, and maintaining the flow of battle. Through it all, Ryan moved with quiet efficiency. He fixed what broke, guided the defenders, and inspired them with his calm confidence. His human spirit had become a force as strong as any weapon in the palace. The queen noticed how the soldiers' eyes followed him, how even her advisors paused to respect his skill and courage. At one point, a large enemy ship broke through the outer defenses and threatened the central courtyard. Without hesitation, Ryan climbed the nearest tower, reaching the cannon just as it began to spark and fail. He adjusted the targeting system, connected the power, and fired the beam. The enemy ship exploded in a brilliant flash, falling away from the palace. The defenders cheered, and the queen felt her heart lift. As the battle wore on, the queen faced her deepest doubts. She had feared defeat, feared the loss of her palace and people. But each time a tower fired, each time a soldier held their ground, each time Ryan's calm hands restored what was broken, her confidence grew. She realized that courage was not about being free from fear, but about acting in spite of it. By the late afternoon, the enemy began to retreat. Their numbers had diminished, their confidence shaken by a palace that refused to fall. The queen's walls stood tall, her towers glowed with power, and her people remained united. Ryan stood beside her, his hands steady, watching the enemy flee. Lura turned to him, her eyes bright. "We did it," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "No, my queen. You did it. I only reminded you that strength was still inside you." She looked at her scars in the sunlight and finally accepted them. They were marks of survival, not shame. They had carried her through the battle and reminded her that even when others abandoned her, she could endure. The palace was quiet again, though the hum of repaired machines and flowing water filled the halls. Soldiers cleaned weapons, repaired damaged walls, and tended to the wounded. Ryan walked beside the queen through the courtyard, his hands still marked with soot and oil. "Your people fought well," he said. "They did because you showed them what could be done," she replied. "You taught me to believe in what remains, to repair what is broken, and to stand when all seems lost." He shook his head. "You were the one to lead them. I only offered my hands and a human touch. The courage was always yours." The queen smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in years. She no longer hid behind her veil. Her scars shone in the sunlight, and she felt stronger for having faced both the enemy and her own doubts. The palace had survived. The queen had survived. And a human traveler had reminded them both that honor, courage, and the will to rise again were stronger than any weapon, stronger than any doubt, stronger than any enemy. The battle was over, and the palace stood intact. The walls, repaired by human hands and the queen's guidance, still glowed with faint light. The gardens whispered of new growth, fountains sang softly, and the halls no longer echoed with silence. The enemy had fled, defeated, and the queen's people breathed again with pride and relief. Queen Lura walked slowly through the grand hall. The weight of her scars was no longer a burden she carried with shame. Instead, they reminded her of the battles she had survived, the losses she had endured, and the courage she had found within herself. Soldiers and servants alike stopped to bow or offer respectful greetings. Even the advisors, who had once doubted her, met her gaze with renewed respect. Ryan followed her quietly, carrying his simple tools in a worn satchel. He had spent the battle working alongside the defenders, repairing towers and weapons while showing them how to fight with what they had. He had done no less than the queen herself, yet he asked for nothing in return. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the value of effort and patience. The queen paused in the central courtyard, where the fountains now flowed clear and the soil held the first sprouts of green. Her eyes fell on Ryan. "Human," she said softly, "you have done more than I could have imagined. You repaired towers, guided my people, and showed me what courage looks like. And yet you smile as if this is simple." Ryan set his tools down and looked at her. His face bore smudges of soot and dirt, his clothes were marked with wear from endless work, yet his eyes held calm warmth. "Because it is simple," he said. "Not because it is easy, but because the heart can choose to act, even when the world seems against it. Courage is simple when you choose to believe in what remains." Lura studied him, her veil discarded for the first time in years. She saw the honesty in his gaze, the truth in his words, and a lesson she had forgotten in the years of war and isolation. She thought of her scars, her losses, and her doubts. She thought of the palace, once abandoned, now alive again. And she realized something she had not allowed herself to feel for a long time: hope. The queen led Ryan to the balcony that overlooked the horizon. The suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beyond the palace walls, the enemy ships had vanished, retreating to their distant homes. The threat was gone, at least for now. "Do you see them?" she asked quietly. "The stars beyond our walls. Some of my people think them distant and cruel. They believe that no good comes from beyond our borders." Ryan's gaze followed hers. "The stars are not cruel," he said. "They are silent witnesses. They shine whether we rise or fall. And they remind us that life is larger than our fears, larger than the scars we carry, larger than the battles we face." The queen nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had once believed beauty was only in smooth skin and perfect form. She had thought scars made her weak, and she had hidden herself behind veils and walls. But now she understood that beauty could be found in strength, in courage, and in the choice to rise again. "You called me beautiful," she said softly, turning to Ryan. "When others called me ugly, when my own people doubted me, why did you call me beautiful?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Because beauty is not the absence of scars. Beauty is the endurance to rise after falling, the courage to act when the world doubts you, and the strength to lead when others have lost hope. You are all of these things, my queen, and no scar can take that away." Her lips trembled slightly, and a warmth filled her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that someone could see her for who she truly was, not just for the marks left by battle. She had survived, she had led, and she had grown stronger than she had realized. The people of the palace gathered in the central courtyard as night fell. Soldiers cleaned weapons, repaired walls, and shared quiet conversations. Servants tended to the wounded and repaired gardens. The air was filled with a sense of life returning, of hope growing in the hearts of those who had nearly lost everything. Lura stood before them, her veil gone, her scars visible and unashamed. She raised her hand and spoke to her people, her voice strong and clear. "My people," she said, "we have faced darkness, we have endured loss, and we have carried scars. But look around you. Our palace lives. Our walls stand. Our gardens grow. And we remain together. That is our strength. That is our beauty. And that is why we rise again." A cheer rose from the crowd, loud and genuine. For the first time in many years, the queen saw faces filled with respect and admiration, not pity or fear. She saw soldiers proud to defend her, servants proud to serve, and advisors proud to follow her guidance. Ryan stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "They see you as you truly are, my queen. Strong, brave, and alive. You led them through fire, and now they follow your example." Lura looked at him, her eyes glistening. "It was easier to stand because you reminded me that strength is simple. It only requires belief and action." He shook his head gently. "No, my queen. The belief was always inside you. I only helped you see it." Night settled over the palace, but the light inside remained. The halls glowed with restored lamps, the fountains sang softly, and the gardens whispered of life returning. Lura walked slowly through the courtyard, her bare hands brushing against the flowers that had begun to bloom. She felt the warmth of her people around her, the presence of a human who had reminded her of hope, and the strength she had rediscovered within herself. Finally, she stopped before Ryan. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she smiled freely. It was a smile born of victory, of survival, and of understanding. It was a smile that no enemy could take away, no doubt could diminish, and no scar could hide. Ryan returned her smile, small and steady, his calm confidence touching her heart. "That is the human smile," he said softly. "It is simple, but it carries more than words. It carries belief, hope, and life." Lura nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had learned that beauty is not defined by appearances or by the praise of others. It is defined by courage, resilience, and the will to rise again after every fall. The palace stood alive, the people stood united, and the queen stood strong. And at the heart of it all was a human who had shown her the power of care, patience, and a simple smile that could change the world. The night deepened, stars twinkling across the sky. Queen Lura looked out from her balcony, her veil gone, her scars visible, and her heart light. She whispered softly to herself, "Perhaps this is what beauty truly is. Strength, courage, and the will to rise again." Ryan stood beside her, and she turned to him. "Thank you," she said. He smiled gently. "No thanks are needed, my queen. You carried the courage all along. I only helped you see it." For the first time in years, Queen Lura felt complete. She had survived battles, healed her palace, reclaimed her people's trust, and discovered that scars could shine as proof of life. And as she looked at the human who had changed everything, she understood the simplest truth of all: sometimes, a single human touch, a calm word, and a quiet smile can restore what was thought lost forever. The palace glowed in the night, the fountains whispered their song, and the queen smiled again, truly and freely, knowing she had risen.